My name is Harriet Whitcombe. I am 72 years old. People believe I spend my days knitting in a quiet corner, a widow with nothing left to defend. They never ask what I once did or who I once was. But today, I walk into a courtroom, not as a spectator, but as something they do not expect. The double doors groaned as I pushed them open. My son, Daniel, had already taken his place at the plaintiff's table. He sat hunched forward, his cane leaning against the chair, his leg braced and stiff. I heard it, the soft, unmistakable laughter of my daughter-in-law, Melissa. She tilted her chin, whispered to her attorney, and said just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "He can barely stand. How is he supposed to raise a child?" Her family, well-dressed and well-rehearsed, nodded along with thin smiles. To them, this was a victory already won, a broken man, an abandoned case, an easy inheritance. But then I stepped in behind my son. Judge Elliot Granger, a man hardened by decades of divorce trials, halted mid-motion. His gavel stopped just inches above the block. He leaned forward, peering over his glasses. His voice dropped, barely more than a breath. "Why? Are you here?" The courtroom shifted. Papers still. The clerk's pen froze in the air. Melissa's smirk, so confident just moments before, wavered. Her father's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. I saw something ripple through them all. Not fear, recognition. They did not expect me. To them, I was only an old woman who lived in the spare room, the one who brewed tea, the one who kept silent during arguments, the one who stood behind her injured son, stroke after stroke, never speaking unless spoken to. They had no idea that before I was a mother, I was something else. I walked forward with steady steps. My shoes met the hardwood floor with a quiet, measured rhythm. I did not bow my head. I did not look for permission. I reached the table, pulled the chair back, and placed my weathered leather folio onto the polished surface. Thud. No speech, no accusation, just that single sound. A line drawn. Melissa shifted in her seat. Her red lips parted as if she had something rehearsed to say, perhaps a comment about mothers knowing their place. But nothing came out. She looked between me and the judge, confused, unsettled, almost afraid. Judge Granger's gaze did not leave me. He knew, or he remembered. My daughter-in-law mocked my son in this courtroom, but when the judge saw me walk in behind him, he stopped and whispered in shock, "Why are you here?" And the room went silent as her proud family looked at one another in panic. They came today believing Daniel would stand alone. But I am here, and what none of them know, not my son, not Melissa, not even the judge who trembles to ask, is that I have stood in this very place before, not as a witness, not as a victim, but as the woman who once decided fates in rooms exactly like this. I did not return for revenge. I returned for truth. And truth, when it finally enters the room, does not knock. It simply arrives, and everything else must fall silent. They will learn soon enough who I was, and why I can no longer remain quiet. The sound of my folio striking wood still rang in my ears as I remember what came before it. The long season when I learned to live without taking up space. People like to imagine that loneliness is loud. In truth, it is quiet and polite. It clears dishes without clatter. It folds blankets the way a guest would. It keeps its voice low so the real family can finish their conversation. I moved into Daniel's house the spring after he married Melissa. The paint still smelled new. The porch steps sang a hopeful note under each footfall. My room faced the garden. In the morning, a pale square of light climbed the far wall. It began near the dresser, reached the mirror by 9, and warmed the rocking chair by noon. I learned that square of light the way a child learns a lullaby. It was the only thing that arrived for me every day without being asked to prove I belonged. In those early months, Melissa called me Mom when friends visited. She did it with the same brightness she used for serving lemon bars. One slice for everyone at the table. When the door closed and the night settled around the eaves, she called me Harriet, clipped at the edges. Not cruel, never vulgar, just precise. Precision can bruise more quietly than a slap. It asks you to measure your steps and stay within the lines. I was not asked about curtains or paint or where the crib should go when Lily was born. Decisions arrive the way weather does. Melissa announced them while arranging flowers, her bracelet chiming against the crystal vase. I nodded and wrote grocery lists. There is a particular dignity in a list. It lets a person contribute without demanding a vote. I cooked dinner because Daniel worked late, and Melissa said the smell of frying onions clung to her hair. I kept the counters clear, the floors quiet, the laundry folded with the corners meeting on every towel. At night, I rinsed the high chair and placed the small pink bowl upside down on a dish towel. The pale plastic made a moon on the cotton. These small moons lined my evenings. They were steady when other things were not. When guests came, Melissa drew me into the bright circle. She touched my elbow, laughed toward me, told stories about my Sunday pies as if she collected mothers the way some women collect china. She did it well. I do not fault her performance. Applause in the form of compliments filled the room like steam over a kettle. Then the door clicked shut. Steam became water again. In the kitchen, she would slide the pie plate toward me without looking up. "Thank you," she would say, and in that moment the words meant, "Now the audience is gone." Daniel tried to bridge the distance. He asked me to sit with him in the garage while he sanded cedar boards for the deck. Sawdust made the air soft. He talked about railings and Lily learning to walk along them. He pressed the house key into my palm, the key he once said would keep anyone from pushing me out again. I wore it on a plain chain under my blouse. I never used it. Habit is a hard teacher. A person who has learned to wait at doors keeps waiting, even when someone says you live here now. Clara noticed before anyone else. I met her years earlier when she was a young nurse with quick hands and a voice that could lower a fever by 1/2 degree. After Lily's birth, Clara visited on her day off with a basket of oranges and a handful of stories that made the baby hiccup with laughter. She watched me scrape plates into the trash and run the sponge under cold water so it would not make noise in the sink. She waited. She always waited for the second truth behind the first one. "Harriet," she asked one afternoon, as sunlight landed like a blessing on the kitchen tile, "has anyone asked how you are living?" The question surprised me more than a shout would have. The words sat between us like a folded letter. I looked at my hands. The wrinkles across the knuckles looked like dry stream beds. I told her I was fine. The answer came out neatly ironed. She nodded, not fooled, and placed an orange on the counter, round and bright, a small sun. "Peel this when you need to remember that sweetness is supposed to be easy," she said. She always did that, gave a thing you could hold so the truth would not float away. There were tender days. I do not lie about them. Melissa once handed me Lily at 4 a.m. and sank onto the couch with a blanket over her head. Exhaustion made a tent around her. I walked the hallway with my granddaughter on my shoulder. The night smelled like warm milk and lemon detergent. At dawn, Melissa whispered thank you without the edges, and I pressed her hand with mine. Women learn to trade strength the way sailors share rope. But more often, I learned to become air. I timed the kettle so the whistle would not interrupt Melissa's conference calls. I walked the long way around the living room so the television's dialogue would not cover my footsteps. During parties, I refilled bowls before anyone noticed they were empty. After parties, I stacked plates and listened to laughter fade in the driveway. I was present for the work and absent for the story. When Daniel fell at the construction site months later, the house changed pitch. Pain lowers a family's ceiling. Voices bend to fit. I slept on the couch outside his door for the first week he came home. The square of morning light moved across the rug and rested on his crutches, metal shining where wood should have been. Melissa kept a schedule on the refrigerator. Pills at 8, therapy at 2, bills listed neatly in a column that did not forgive. I respected the order she wanted. Order is how some hearts keep from breaking. Still, the air thinned. Melissa stopped calling. Me mom even for company. She used Harriet the way a person uses a pin to keep a dress in place. She did not insult Daniel. She did not need to. She announced errands that stretched into evenings. She bought dresses that asked for new explanations. None of this is a crime. Yet there are crimes against the soul that never reach a courtroom, the kind that turn a home into a waiting room. Clara came again, later than usual, carrying a tin of tea shaped like a lighthouse. She set it near the stove and watched the steam from the pot curl into a white ribbon. "You are letting the water boil too long," she said, smiling with her eyes. I told her I had been standing still and forgot to turn the knob. She did not correct me. She lifted the tin, placed it in my hands, and said, "Signal yourself home." It was a small sentence. It opened a door I did not know I could open. I started taking my tea in the garden before sunrise. The square of light had not yet begun its work on the wall. Dew held to the grass like promises that had not been tested. I breathed without apologizing for the sound. I could hear my own thoughts in that hour. They were not crowded by anyone else's plans. I told the morning what I feared, that I had become necessary and invisible at the same time. The morning did not argue. It offered a bird on the fence and a breeze that smelled like wet soil. The world kept its appointment with me. When Melissa's parents visited, they praised her poise and called her a warrior for shouldering hardship while her husband recovered. I agreed that she had stamina. I did not add that stamina without kindness becomes a treadmill. Daniel thanked everyone and tried to stand for too long. He sank into his chair with his jaw clenched, ashamed of gravity. Later in the kitchen, I massaged his hands where the cane made a dent. He apologized for the weight he imagined he had become. I told him weight is not a sin. Abandoning someone under it is. On Sundays, I drove to the market for pears and bone broth. I parked far from the entrance because I like quiet before noise. The cashier learned my name. She asked about the little girl who sometimes rode in my cart and called me Gran. I said Lily was clever and liked to line up sugar packets like dominoes. The cashier said that sounded like a future architect. I took the compliment home and placed it on the mantel the way other people place trophies. Hope looks good in any room. I wish I could say I confronted Melissa then, demanded respect, and required my share of air. The truth is softer and therefore more difficult to cheer for. I remained. I worked. I watched. I kept the ledger of what a house needs and what a heart cannot survive. I practiced silence not as surrender, but as a way to hear what was coming. The day I heard Melissa's voice through the bedroom door, coaching Lily on what to say to a judge, my silence ended. Not with a shout, with a decision. Clara's question followed me down the hallway that night like a lantern. "Has anyone asked how you are living?" I answered it finally, though no one else was there to hear. I said, "I am living like wind under a door. I am living like light that finds a seam. I am living, and I am almost ready to be seen." By morning, the square of light reached the rocking chair. I sat in it with the lighthouse tin in my lap. I poured 1 cup for courage and 1 for clarity. The second cup I left steaming near the sink. People assume courage is loud. I have learned it can taste like hot water and patience. When Daniel woke, I helped him wash. When Melissa announced her plans in a voice that asked for no reply, I nodded. My decision did not need an audience. It needed time. The day in court would come. Before it did, I would walk into a different room, the one inside myself where I kept a key on a chain and a name I had not used in years. I would turn that key and open that door. I would step out of the shadow I had so carefully maintained, not to fight for attention, but to stand where truth could find me. There are parts of a mother's memory that do not fade with age. They do not slip the way names and street corners sometimes do. They stay sharp, as if carved into oak. One such memory is the day my son, Daniel, told me he would build a house with his own hands. Not buy one, not rent one. Build it, board by board, until I would never fear losing a home again. Daniel was always drawn to wood. As a boy, he pocketed splinters the way other children collected marbles. He carved birds from scrap pine, sanding their wings until they were soft as river stones. The first time he held a chisel, he cut himself and bled across the plank. He didn't cry. He watched the blood soak the grain and whispered, "The wood knows me now." It startled me then. I understand it now. By 20, he was a carpenter, the kind who did not measure twice because he already saw the cut before the blade touched. He worked sunup to sundown, repairing porches, framing barns, building kitchen tables that would outlive their owners. I attended one of his installs once. The customer, A woman with silver hair and a stern face traced her fingers over the dovetail joint and asked him, "How long will it last?" Daniel smiled in that quiet way of his and answered, "Longer than both of us." Her eyes watered. Real craftsmanship does that. It reminds people that someone believed something should endure. It was after one such job that he came to my small rental apartment, smelling of cedar and sweat. He stood in the doorway, awkward, shifting from one boot to the other. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to build a house." I thought he meant for himself and Melissa, who he had just started courting. I nodded. "Every man should build a home if he can." He shook his head. "No, for you." He didn't elaborate, but I understood. He remembered. He remembered the night his father put my suitcase on the porch. He remembered me begging quietly, never loudly, for Richard to let me stay until morning light. Daniel had been 10, old enough to hear what doors sound like when they lock against you. He worked on the house every weekend for 2 years. I visited only once, early in construction. The frame stood like a rib cage against the sky. He was on the roof, hammering shingles, sweat running from his temples. I called up, asking if he needed iced tea. He looked down and said, "Just wait till it's done." His voice carried more than ambition. It carried repentance he'd never owed me. When the house was finished, he didn't host a party, no ribbon, no photographer. He simply drove to my apartment in his pickup and said, "Come." We rode in silence. Gravel crunched under the tires as we pulled into the drive. The house stood with quiet dignity, white siding, a deep porch, 3 steps leading to a red front door. A rocking chair already waited beside it, angled toward the view of the yard. The sun was lowering, painting the windows gold. He didn't take my arm. He knew I needed to walk to it alone. My feet moved slower than my heartbeat. I ran my hand along the railing. The wood was smooth, edges rounded, no sharpness, no splinters. "I sanded this one extra," he said behind me, "so your hands won't catch." I didn't realize I was crying until I saw a tear fall on the step. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass key on a thin silver chain. He placed it in my palm and wrapped my fingers around it. "Mom," he whispered, voice graveling with emotion he tried to hide. "This house, no one can ever put you out again." I had no words, only breath, only trembling. I wanted to tell him I had never blamed him for the night he could not stop, but my throat held silence, the kind that carries both grief and grace. I moved in a week later. My room faced the garden. Mornings brought sun on the floorboards, the smell of cut grass if the windows were cracked. I hung the key on a nail above the nightstand. I never used it, not once. I waited each evening for Daniel or Melissa to open the door. Habit is a house harder to leave than any with walls. Some women claim their independence by breaking locks. Mine was measured by how gently I entered spaces uninvited. I wiped my shoes, even on rugs meant to catch dirt. I asked permission to open the refrigerator, though it was stocked with food I had paid for. I turned doorknobs slowly, ashamed of hinges creaking at my presence. The key hung there, shining softly with each sunrise as if asking, "Will you claim what has already been given?" Daniel noticed once when I came back inside after a walk. He asked lightly, "Mom, why don't you ever use your key?" I smiled and said, "Because I always find the door open." He nodded, believing that was gratitude. It was in part, but I never told him the rest. I did not fear the door being locked. I feared what it would mean to open it myself. Owning a key is not the same as believing you belong inside. Over time, I learned the sounds of the house. The left stair groaned, the pantry door stuck in summer, the attic fan hummed with a vibration like a lullaby. When storms came, rain drummed the skylight above the hallway. I loved that sound. It felt like a company that did not judge. Daniel built a bench under the kitchen window. "So you can drink tea and watch the trees," he said. I sat there each night, steam in my hands, watching birds gather in the branches. When Melissa entered, heels clicking, perfume rising like a flag, I would step aside. The bench was wide enough for 2. We never sat together. Still, I honored the house. I polished the wood counters with lemon oil. I swept sawdust Daniel tracked in after late projects. I dusted the mantel where he planned to place family pictures. For a while, that mantel remained empty, a bare altar waiting for memory. On the first winter in that house, Daniel fixed a loose shingle in the freezing wind. His knuckles cracked and bled. I scolded him, saying, "Leave it for the morning." He shrugged. "The roof needs to hold. You're sleeping under it." That night, I pressed salve into his hands while he slept in the chair. Love is not always soft. Sometimes it is the insistence that snow will not seep through. I never told Daniel this, but in those early mornings on the porch, I would touch the side of the house and murmur, "Thank you." Not to him, to the walls, to the labor, to the shelter I could not yet enter with my whole self. The day I heard Melissa speak of dividing assets, I walked back to my room and looked at the key. It hung there, loyal and unused, a symbol of a promise kept by a son, and a promise delayed by a mother. I lifted it, held it in my palm, and asked aloud, "What good is a key if I still wait outside the door?" The walls did not answer, but something in me did. Belonging is not given, it is taken gently. And I was beginning to understand. I had lived in a house of my son's devotion, but I had not yet stepped into the home of my own worth. Before Melissa became a shadow in my house, she arrived as a ray of light. I would be dishonest if I pretended otherwise. I remember the first evening Daniel brought her to meet me, a late summer Sunday when the air held that golden hum of cicadas and settling heat. She walked across my porch with a basket of peaches cradled in her arms, her smile soft, her voice gentle as she said, "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Whitcombe." When I told her to call me Harriet, she shook her head with an earnestness that caught me off guard. "I'd rather call you Mom, if that's all right." It pierced something tender in me. Few people in my life had asked to claim me. Most preferred to leave me unnamed, undefined, like a piece of old furniture they were unsure whether to keep or discard. But Melissa, she claimed me quickly, gracefully. She sat at my kitchen table that night, her hands folded, speaking of Sunday dinners, holiday traditions, and the joy of raising children near family. "I want a house full of noise," she said, glancing at Daniel. "A place where no one ever eats alone." I remember thinking, perhaps I have a daughter. It was such a foolish, hopeful thought. But hope is rarely wise. It simply arrives, much like Melissa did, unexpected and full of promise. In those first months, she helped me shell peas and peel apples. She laughed at Daniel's stories, even the ones that trailed off halfway through. She brought me tea in the evenings, chamomile with honey, and sat beside me on the porch swing. "I've never had a real mother figure," she said once, her eyes turned toward the dusk. I rested my hand over hers and replied, "Then let us start quietly." But beginnings can deceive. They often come dressed in borrowed sincerity. The first crack I noticed was subtle. One night after a family supper, I was gathering plates when Daniel asked Melissa if she wanted to help dry the dishes. It was a small, ordinary question. She smiled and said, "Of course." But when I turned to hand her a towel, she had already walked out of the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her laughter floating down the hall. I told myself she must have been called away. I made excuses the way women are trained to, automatically, as if forgiveness is sewn into our instincts. The excuses thinned over time. She began to skip dinners when no guests were present, claiming she had work to finish or errands to run. Yet whenever Daniel invited friends or colleagues, she would appear radiant, arranging napkins, lighting candles, insisting I sit at the head of the table. She called me Mom then, her voice warm like broth. But when the door closed behind the last guest, she would walk past me as though I were a hallway she had already passed through one too many times. I tried not to measure the differences, but human hearts are quiet mathematicians. They count every kindness, every absence. I remember one evening vividly. I heard the unmistakable crash of glass from the dining room. I hurried toward the sound, instinct drawing me like a current. But before I could reach the doorway, Melissa's voice, sharp and clipped, cut through the air. "I've got it," she said. "Please don't come in." I froze. It was not anger in her tone. It was ownership, as if there were places in that house where my presence was suddenly an intrusion. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the wall, listening to the sweep of shards against wood. I waited for her to emerge. She did not. She cleaned in silence and left through the side door without a word. It was the first time I realized I had stopped being her mom. I had become something else, something that could be moved around, politely included, strategically kept at the edges of photographs and plans. Chairs, remember. I began to notice how the empty chairs at dinner seemed arranged not by accident but by avoidance. If I sat at one end of the table, she chose the other. If I moved closer, she shifted 3 seats down, smiling as if unaware of the distance. Daniel never saw it. Love blinds men to silent choreography. But I saw. I felt. Chairs scrape truths more honestly than voices ever do. Still, I told myself she was tired, overwhelmed, adjusting. I held my discomfort like a folded cloth in my lap, neat and invisible. After all, she never used harsh words. She never shouted. She simply edited me out of moments, trimming my presence the way a seamstress snips excess thread. Holidays were the strangest. At Thanksgiving, she insisted I carve the turkey, announcing to everyone, "Mom makes everything feel traditional." Yet when I spoke, she spoke over me. When I offered toasting words, she raised her glass before I finished. Gratitude became performance. I became prop. Clara noticed the change before Daniel did. She visited on a rainy afternoon, bringing a tin of cinnamon cookies. We sat by the kitchen window while Melissa hosted a book club in the living room. Laughter rippled through the walls. I did not join. Clara watched me stir my tea, uninvited, unwanted. "Honor can be a prison," she murmured. "You keep refusing to enter rooms you helped build." I wanted to deny it, but I could not. There was a day when Melissa found me polishing Daniel's woodworking bench in the garage. She leaned against the frame of the door, arms crossed. "You don't have to clean everything," she said. I replied softly, "I don't like dust settling where someone once created." She tilted her head. "Sometimes dust is just dust, Harriet." And she left. It struck me, not cruel but hollow. She did not understand the difference between dirt and memory, between mess and devotion. A workshop swept clean by someone else's hands erases a man's proof of work. Yet I still rooted for her. I prayed she would grow into the woman she pretended to be during those first Sundays. I set aside mismatches and misunderstandings, telling myself that families are stitched over time, not pressed perfect like linen. Even when she stopped asking for my recipes and stopped seeking my presence, I waited. I waited because I believed patience could make room. I waited because Daniel loved her. I waited because love, to me, meant staying even when no one asked you to stay. But love, without listening, ferments into something sour. One quiet evening, as I wiped the counter, I looked toward the guest room where she kept her office. The door was ajar. She was inside, laughing on the phone, her back turned to the hallway. She said, "I can't breathe in that kitchen. She's always there, watching." She paused, listening. Then she whispered, "No, she's harmless, just occupying space." Occupying space. It was not an insult. It was a verdict. I walked outside that night and sat on the porch, the key to my room warm against my chest. The house Daniel built stood tall around me, faithful. But I understood, perhaps for the first time, that a woman can live inside 4 walls and still be exiled, not by eviction, but by omission. I did not cry. I traced the grain of the wooden railing with my thumb and thought, even wood remembers every pressure it endures. People should, too. In the weeks that followed, I learned to speak less. Silence became my shelter. I answered kindly, moved softly, made no demands. I watched Melissa curate dinners for guests, brushing past me with plates set for 8. I set napkins, poured water, lit candles when asked. And when no one asked, I stood in the doorway, invisible but essential. I do not blame her entirely. Some women have never been taught how to inherit another woman's presence. They only know how to replace it. I believed the fracture could be mended. I believed time would soften its edges. I did not yet know the deeper break was still coming. The one that would not end in misunderstanding, but in betrayal. And that on the night I would finally hear it, I would no longer be standing at tables or wiping counters. I would be standing outside a bedroom door, listening, and something inside me, something older than patience, would begin to turn. There are moments in a mother's life when sound leaves the world, when even breath feels too loud. The night Daniel fell was one of those moments. I remember the phone ringing at 10:47 p.m. It was not the hour that frightened me. It was the silence that followed his name. "Is this Mrs. Whitcombe?" the voice asked. No one calls a mother by her formal name at that hour unless something unspeakable has occurred. He's been in an accident at the construction site. I don't remember locking the door behind me. I don't remember the drive. I remember only the red lights of the hospital entrance, pulsing like a wound in the night. When I reached the trauma unit, Clara was already there. She must have rushed from her night shift. She met me with eyes that spoke first, the way nurses do when truth arrives before language. "He's alive," she said, placing her hands on my shoulders. "But it's bad." She guided me to a chair, but I couldn't sit. A nurse walked past, pushing a gurney stained with sawdust and blood. Daniel's work boots were still laced, splattered with the life he had poured into every plank and beam. I reached for them, not to hold them, but to stop the world from moving. Someone pulled me back. Time stretched. Hours became elastic, expanding and contracting around the swing of operating room doors. People came, left, charted, and whispered. I heard a doctor mutter, "2 shattered femurs, possible spinal involvement." The words hit like boards to the chest. I folded over, hands on my knees, trying not to drown in the sound of my own pulse. Melissa arrived just after midnight. Her heels clicked across the linoleum like a metronome. She did not run. She did not look lost. She sat in the waiting room, opened her purse, and reapplied her lipstick. Only then did she ask, "How long will this take?" I thought perhaps she was in shock. Shock takes many shapes. Some people scream, some people faint, some people powder their faces. I waited for her to break. She didn't. At 2:03 a.m., a surgeon approached us. He removed his cap, ran a hand through damp hair, and spoke the sentence no mother ever forgets. He might never walk again. The hallway warped. The world narrowed to the beating behind my ribs. I gripped the back of a chair, afraid I would fall through the floor. Beside me, Melissa crossed her arms and asked, "Well, what about insurance?" The doctor blinked. Clara turned her face away. I stared at Melissa, not in anger, but in awe, at the vast distance that can exist between one human heart and another. When they finally let me see him, Daniel lay swollen beneath tubes and bandages. His face was pale, lips cracked, hair plastered to his forehead. His legs were encased in metal and gauze. Machines breathed in rhythm with him. I touched his hand. It was warm, but motionless. "Danny?" I whispered, using the name from his childhood. "Mama's here." His eyelids fluttered, but he did not wake. I stayed in that room until a nurse asked me to step out while they adjusted his dressings. Clara offered me her spare jacket, the navy one she kept in her locker, and I took it, draping it around my shoulders. It was still warm from her body. I walked back into the hallway, but my legs gave way halfway down. I slid to the floor, back against the cold wall, knees pulled tight. Someone set a plastic water bottle beside me. I clutched it, though I didn't drink. It grounded me, an anchor in a sea of sterile air. I heard the monitor beeping from Daniel's room. Birth is noisy, death is noisy, but suffering, real suffering, is quiet. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the vending machine lights to dim, long enough for the night to soften toward dawn. A janitor mopped around me, careful not to touch my shoes. He did not speak. Some silences deserve protection. When I returned to the waiting area, Melissa was scrolling through her phone. "They're saying he might need long-term care," she said, not looking up. "Do you know how expensive that is?" I did not answer. There are responses that do not belong to words. As morning broke, Daniel was moved to recovery. I stood at the window, watching the sky pinken. The parking lot glistened with dew, a single crow perched on the roof, black against the blush of sunrise. I felt something ancient move inside me. Not rage, something colder, something enduring. The knowledge that destiny had changed shape and we would not be returning to the house in the same way we had left it. When they wheeled Daniel to his room, he stirred. Opening his eyes briefly, he looked at me, pain clouded by morphine, and in that flicker, I saw a boy afraid he had failed his promise. I leaned close and said, "You built enough. You've carried enough." His lashes trembled. A tear slipped into his hair. That afternoon, while he slept, I stepped outside to the hospital garden, wearing Clara's jacket. I sat on a bench beneath an iron arch overgrown with ivy. I closed my eyes. The world smelled of rain and bleach. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from memory. I had been here before, not in place, but in condition. I had been the woman watching a life dismantle piece by piece, too slow to stop, too fast to understand. Years ago, it was my husband. Now it was my son. I thought I had escaped tragedy by outliving it. I was wrong. Grief is patient. It circles back. When I returned inside, Melissa was at the nurse's station asking how long before she could return to work. "I can't lose my position," she said. "We can hire someone for him." For him. As if he were freight. As if devotion could be subcontracted. She didn't see me. Or perhaps she did, and didn't care. I walked to Daniel's room and sat beside him. The beeping monitors kept time. I placed my hand over his and made a vow, not out loud, but in the marrow of my bones. If he could no longer stand, I would stand twice as firmly. If he could no longer speak for himself, I would retrieve the voice I once buried. And if anyone tried to strip from him what he had built, they would discover that I too once knew how to build and how to defend. Not with shouting, with a witness, with record, with truth. I stayed through the night. At dawn, Clara came to relieve me. She knelt beside my chair and asked softly, "Harriet, how are you living?" I looked at my son, broken but breathing, and I answered, "Standing watch." The shift had begun. I did not yet know it, but the quiet war was already underway. The first battle was not in court. It was in that hallway, beside a water bottle and a borrowed jacket, where a mother decided she would not let her child be undone, not by fate, and not by those who mistook his suffering for inconvenience. That was the night I stopped being a shadow. That was the night I remembered the door I had a key to, and that was the night I knew I would use it. In the weeks after Daniel returned home from the hospital, our house changed its temperature. It was not sudden. There was no slammed door, no shouted confession. It was something far more chilling, like a draft you can't quite find, but one that steals warmth from every room. The house still stood where he had built it, but something in it had begun to wither. Daniel was determined to believe that life could resume, that love could bend without breaking. He practiced his physical therapy with a soldier's grit, sweat beading along his hairline as he gripped the parallel bars set up in the den. He would say, through clenched teeth, "It's temporary. I'll walk again." I never corrected him. Hope is sacred, even when it limps. Melissa was polite, perfectly polite. She prepared schedules, taped them to the refrigerator, arranged Daniel's medications in color-labeled bottles. She never missed a doctor's appointment. She never forgot the dosage. And yet there was no tenderness. Care is not the same as love. One can be carried out with the precision of an accountant. She began to dress differently. The soft cotton dresses she once wore were replaced by fitted suits and silk blouses. Her perfume no longer smelled like vanilla and soap. It smelled like nightclubs and ambition. She came home later. Sometimes she arrived long after Lily had gone to bed. Sometimes she arrived after midnight. She always had explanations, meetings, deadlines, drinks after presentations. She spoke of clients and promotions. She never spoke of Daniel's pain. Daniel tried not to see it. He convinced himself that her distance was grief taking an unfamiliar form. He said things like, "She's stressed, and she just needs time to adjust." He believed love, once spoken in vows, could not shift into indifference without warning. He believed vows had weight. He forgot that not everyone carries them. I said nothing. Words can wound a wounded man. Instead, I laid blankets over his legs when he dozed in his chair. I reheated tea untouched on his nightstand. I was careful, always careful, that he would not feel pitied. Pity is the knife pride cannot dull. One evening, while he rested in the den, I passed by the hallway leading to Melissa's office. The door was ajar. I heard her voice, quiet, low, but edged. "I can't do this forever," she said into her phone. "I didn't sign up to be a nurse." A pause. Then sharper. "No, he's not going to get better. They say he'll walk, but that doesn't mean he'll be a man again." My hand found the wall. Anger rose, but not the kind that burns. It was the cold kind, the kind that collects, drop by drop, into a blade. I stepped away before she saw me. I went to the kitchen and washed dishes long past their need. The sponge foamed and flattened. The water went lukewarm. My hands shook only once. Later that night, I heard her speaking to Daniel. "I need to get some air," she told him. "Don't wait up." He reached toward her, slow and careful. "We could watch something," he offered. She placed her coat over her arm. "You'll be asleep," she said, and left. He sat for an hour, staring at the muted television. The key to the house hung on its chain against my collarbone. I almost stood, almost walked to him, almost spoke the truth. But motherhood teaches the danger of truths delivered too soon. Some truths must be carried until they can be survived. Days passed. Her absence grew louder. She stopped eating at the table. She claimed headaches, deadlines, exhaustion. She never said resentment, but resentment does not require language. It stains the air. One night, while folding Daniel's laundry, I overheard her again, this time in the garage, voice brittle with calculation. "I won't spend the rest of my life bathing an injured man," she hissed. "I deserve more than this." An injured man. She could not say his name. Pain is easier to reject when named as an object. I set the folded shirt down and stood still. A single thought formed, stark and unsparing. Do I hate her? The answer did not come. Hatred is heavy, and I have carried too much to pick it up lightly. But there was grief, for the girl who once called me mom, for the woman she had not become, for the wife she had promised to be. Moral conflict, they call it in textbooks. In life, it is simpler. How do you condemn someone you once prayed for? Daniel did not confront her. He absorbed her absence the way injured trees absorb winter, quietly, without a display. He asked her once, gently, "Are you unhappy?" She replied, "This isn't what I imagined." He nodded, his shoulders folding inward. She did not see the wound her honesty carved. I began to understand something I had never wanted to know. Love does not always die in storms. Sometimes it dries out, like fruit left in the sun, sweet at first, then leathery, then nothing but skin. One evening, Clara visited. She brought lemon cake and sat with Daniel while he slept. When she stepped into the kitchen, she studied my face. "What have you heard?" she asked. I almost lied. Habit. But then I said, "Enough." She nodded as if she had been waiting for that one word. "You cannot stop the break," she said, "but you can catch what it tries to crush." Catch. Not fight, not exposed. Catch. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my room. I lifted the chain from my neck. The key lay in my palm, warm from my skin. I looked at my reflection, a woman who had once believed her silence was strength. I closed my fingers around the key. Promises can be kept by those who build walls, but justice, that must be kept by those who know how easily walls can become cages. Daniel still believed. He still waited for Melissa to return. I no longer did. I watched her leave the house at 10 p.m., heels clicking like a clock running out. I watched Daniel turn off the lamp and pretend not to notice. I watched Lily ask, "Is Mommy working again?" I answered, "Yes, darling," because cruelty serves no child. But inside me, something shifted. Not vengeance, not envy, a resolve. A house may be built by a carpenter, but a home, when it is threatened, may yet be defended by a woman who once knew the law of hammers and hinges. I had laid down my voice years ago, but I remembered where I had left it. When love loses its shape, some call it tragedy. I call it truth. And truth has a way of demanding witness. I did not hate Melissa, I simply saw her clearly, and clarity, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. It was late when I heard it, the kind of late when the house has settled, when drawers are closed, when even grief grows quiet. I had risen to fetch my shawl from the hallway. The door to Lily's room was almost shut, only a sliver of yellow light slipping through. I was about to knock, thinking she might be reading her picture books past bedtime. Then I heard Melissa's voice, not raised, not frantic, worse, it was controlled. "You must say it clearly, Lily," she instructed. "When the judge asks, you tell him you don't want to live with your father." There was a pause, then Lily's small voice trembling. "But I love Daddy." Melissa exhaled, long and sharp. "Love won't feed you," she replied. "Love won't pay school fees. You want a good life, don't you?" Silence. I stepped closer. My hand found the wall, palm flat, as if the plaster might steady what was coming undone inside me. I don't want to lie," Lily whispered. Melissa's voice dropped lower. "You're not lying. You're telling the truth the court needs to hear. He can't take care of you. He can't even stand up without help." Her tone remained even, almost instructional. "You say you're scared to live with him. Do you understand?" The stillness in that sliver of hallway was so complete, I could hear the thudding of my own pulse. I waited for Lily to fold, the way children do when cornered by authority, but her breath broke, and she sobbed, not loudly, but with the soft, crumpled sound of something sacred tearing. "I don't want to hurt Daddy." A chair scraped. Fabric rustled. Melissa's reply came through clenched teeth. "This isn't about getting hurt. It's about survival. If we lose this house, we lose everything. You don't want to end up in some tiny apartment with nothing, do you? Do you want to watch Grandma live on a couch?" I pressed my fingertips into the wall. It felt cold, like the skin of the dead. I did not cry. Tears are too soft for such moments. This was beyond heartbreak. This was desecration, of loyalty, of innocence, of truth. Lily's hiccuped reply floated through the crack. "Will I still see Daddy?" "If he can afford it," Melissa answered. I closed my eyes. Had I stepped into some alternate world? Just months ago, Melissa had spoken of family dinners, of Sunday laughter, of being a house full of warmth. How does a woman's tenderness evaporate so thoroughly that she can teach her own child to betray the father who held her through nightmares? Children are never born with cruelty. They borrow it. I leaned my forehead against the wall. I felt its chill coat my skin. I did not move. I did not speak. I was not afraid of being heard. I was afraid of what I might say if I opened my mouth. Lily cried again. "Mommy, I'm scared." That should have been the line that stopped everything. A mother should fold then, should cradle, should apologize, but Melissa's response came quiet and unyielding. "Fear is normal. Use it. Judges believe fear more than love." I swallowed something sharp, something metallic, blood perhaps, or fury, but I did not enter. I did not step into that room. That was the first moment I understood the true shape of this battle. It was no longer between a wife and a husband. It had entered the soul of a child. I waited until their voices faded. I heard the door close softly, Melissa's steps retreating, Lily's sobs muffled beneath her pillow. Then I moved, not toward them, but down the hall into the kitchen. I set my palms on the counter's edge. My hands trembled, not with fear, with decision. Mothers are expected to defend. Grandmothers are expected to endure. But there comes a point, as thin as breath, when endurance becomes betrayal. I lit the stove. Though I did not need tea, I simply needed flame. Something alive in the room, since everything else had turned spectral. The kettle trembled, water hissed. In the reflection of the dark window, I saw myself, hair silvered, shoulders stooped. But my eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a guest in my own life. They were the eyes of a witness. When the tea was done, I switched off the flame and stood there motionless until the whistle died. Behind me, the house remained silent. But in that silence, a great many things had shifted. I understood then. I could no longer protect Daniel by quiet labor. I could no longer shield Lily by gentle presence. This was a different war, a war fought not with noise, but with record, with truth, with law. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The key, my son's promise, hung from its chain. I wrapped my fingers around it. For the first time since he'd given it to me, I squeezed it until the metal marked my skin. They think I am only a mother, I thought. They have forgotten what kind of woman I had to become before I ever became a mother. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I watched the dark give way to a paling sky. At dawn, Melissa's car pulled from the driveway. Daniel remained unaware. Lily's door stayed closed, hiding a child who had been instructed to wound the very person who would die to protect her. Some truths are shouted, some are carved. This one was carved. By morning, I knew. The day she uses that child in court is the day I will stop being silent, not to destroy her, but to defend what she is willing to destroy. When love loses its shape, some call it heartbreak. But this was different. This was trespass. And I, who once believed silence was survival, finally understood. Silence, too, can be a crime. There is a moment in every long silence when a woman must decide whether she will remain unseen or whether she will step back into the world she once walked with power. For me, that moment arrived after the night behind Lily's door, the night I realized that love had been twisted into a weapon. It did not break me. It awakened me. I did not sleep. Instead, I reached for the box I kept beneath my bed, a wooden one, carved with an oak leaf on the lid, a gift from a colleague long forgotten. Inside lay fragments of a life I had almost succeeded in burying. Newspaper clippings, courtroom sketches, a fountain pen with chipped lacquer, and a business card so worn the letters were fading. Harriet Gray, attorney at law. Yes, Gray. Whitcombe was my married name, but before I became someone's wife, before I became someone's mother, I was Harriet Gray, the woman who never lost a case she chose to argue. Some called me relentless. Some called me unshakable. I only ever wanted to be precise. Truth has edges. I learned how to hold them without bleeding. I specialized in cases no one else would take: exploited workers, battered spouses, tenants evicted without cause. I did not fight for victory. I fought for the record, for history to acknowledge what power had tried to erase. It was in my 10th year of practice that I took that case, the one that ended everything. A single mother accused of theft from the company she had served faithfully for 13 years. She insisted on her innocence. I believed her. I gathered evidence, traced inconsistencies, dismantled witness testimony. In court, I cornered the manager who had accused her. His answers trembled. The truth strained at the seams. I should have won. But the verdict came down in less than an hour. Guilty. I remember rising from my seat, the blood roaring in my ears. I looked at the judge, an old colleague of my mentor. His eyes did not meet mine. Later, a clerk slipped me a quiet apology. The company had influence, donations, relationships. The law had not failed. Men had. I visited my client in holding. She gripped the bars and whispered, "You told the truth. They didn't want it." That night, I sat in my office until dawn, staring at the closed door. I realized then I was no longer speaking to law. I was speaking to the walls. Within the month, I resigned my license. Some begged me to reconsider. Others celebrated my departure. I gave no explanation. I simply left. I put away my suits. I packed my books. I kept only the pen. When Richard, my husband, left years later, people wondered why I did not fight. Why I did not chase. Why did I not roar? They did not know I had already fought a war and lost, not to folly, but to corruption. They did not know I had already buried a voice sharp enough to cut marble. They did not know that I did not leave law because I was defeated. I left because I refused to let justice rot inside me. Motherhood became my verdict. I chose Daniel. I chose dinner tables over deliberation rooms. I chose lullabies over legal briefs. I chose not to speak, believing silence might keep peace. But I was naive. Silence is not peace. Silence is only the setting of a stage for someone else's voice. For years, I accepted the shrinking of my existence. I allowed Melissa to overlook me, Daniel to lean on me, the world to misplace me. I convinced myself I had softened, that softness was noble. But the truth is simpler. I did not grow weaker. I only grew quiet. I kept my seams stitched because I believed my family needed mending more than the world needed another firebrand lawyer. I told myself I had laid down my weapons for love. But love, unchecked, can become a muzzle. After the night with Lily, I opened the oak box fully. I spread its contents across my bed. The courtroom sketches, me at the lectern, eyes unflinching, headlines, Gray delivers final blow in tenant rights trial. The pen, I lifted it. It felt foreign yet familiar, like an old injury that still remembers rain. I could still see the judge's face from that last trial, the man who sold justice, the man whose verdict tasted like rust. I had promised myself I would never beg a gavel again, but this was different. This was my son. This was my granddaughter. This was a woman teaching a child to perjure love. I realized then, the courtroom had not been my enemy. It was only the arena. The true adversary had always been the manipulation of truth, and that battle had returned to my doorstep. I rose from the bed and walked to the mirror. My reflection did not frighten me. The wrinkles, the gray hair, the softened jaw, none of it mattered. My eyes were what I searched for. They were still there, a little weathered perhaps, but clear. "You are not gone," I whispered to her. I took the business card and slid it into the pocket of my cardigan, not because I needed credentials, but because I needed a reminder. I once stood for those the world dismissed. Now, I stood among them. At breakfast the next morning, Melissa breezed through the kitchen, perfume sharp, purse swinging. She glanced at me, barely. "Lily will stay with me this weekend. We have plans." She expected no reply. She received none. Daniel ate slowly, careful with his pain. He did not see the oak box now tucked beneath my arm. He did not know that inside it rested a sleeping lion. "Mom," he said, looking up with tired eyes, "thank you for everything you're doing." I touched his hand. "I'm only getting started." He smiled, misunderstanding. I let him. Some truths must ripen before they are revealed. That afternoon, I walked to the garden. I sat beneath the sycamore tree and held the pen between my fingers. I tested its weight. Then I whispered, not as prayer, but as summons. I did not grow weaker. I only grew quiet. The wind rose, shifting leaves overhead. I felt no fear. They believe I am only his mother. They will soon learn I was once his defender, long before he was old enough to speak. And I am ready to defend him again. This time not from the unknown, but from love's most dangerous mirage, betrayal disguised as care. The house Daniel built still stands, but the woman inside, she is no longer just waiting by doors. She is walking toward them with a key and a record and a name the court has not heard in years, Harriet Gray. It is one thing to awaken. It is another to add. I did not turn into a storm. I did not raise my voice nor confront Melissa with anger. A storm announces itself. Justice does not. Justice arrives like frost, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. I began in the only place a careful woman begins, with witness. Clara was the first person I went to. We met at dawn, in the hospital courtyard where she often took her coffee before shift. It was cold enough for our breaths to show. She sat on the bench beside me, without question. "You're ready," she said, not as encouragement, but as observation. "I need your statement," I replied. She didn't ask why. She had seen enough of Payne's architecture to recognize when someone was reinforcing their walls. She tore a sheet of paper from her notebook and wrote in her neat, slanted script. She described Daniel's condition, his resilience. She included the night she found Melissa in the hall, saying, "We can't afford to carry someone who won't get better." When she finished, She signed her full name, Clara Jennings, RN. Then she placed the page in my hands. "Harriet," she said softly, "truth without record is only memory. Write it down, make them see it." I nodded. That was the thing about Clara. She knew the difference between comfort and preparation. Comfort softens. Preparation strengthens. From there, I climbed the basement stairs of my own history. I had not opened that basement door in years. Dust coated the latch. I pulled the chain for the single bulb, and light spilled down like honey onto relics long undisturbed. The shelves were lined with boxes from life before Daniel, before marriage, before silence. I found what I was looking for on the lowest shelf, a battered leather case, corners scuffed. Inside were the remains of Harriet Gray, trial notes bound with twine, a fountain pen dried stiff with ink, a recorder with a cracked battery door, and a coiled length of rope I once used during demonstrative evidence to prove a man had been bound unlawfully. Evidence. Tools of a woman who did not guess, a woman who proved. I held the recorder. It wheezed when I pressed play. Nothing but static. The microphone rusted. Broken. But even broken tools can serve, if one remembers how to repair them. It took 3 nights to restore it. I cleaned the corroded contacts with vinegar, replaced the batteries, rewired the jack with a paperclip. When I pressed record, a hiss filled the air, then silence. Clean, usable silence. A vessel ready to hold truth. I did not use it immediately. Patience matters. Timing decides whether words condemn or acquit. The opportunity came one evening when Melissa returned late. Daniel had already gone to bed, exhausted from therapy. Lily slept in tangled curls. Melissa entered. Through the kitchen door, her heels in her hand. She poured herself a glass of wine and muttered into her phone, unaware of the hatch above the pantry where I stood. Still's installation. "I can't carry this forever," she said. "His mother can mop and cook, but I'm not living like a nurse. Once we get settled in custody, I'll be free." I didn't breathe. I pressed the worn red button. Her voice, smooth as silk-turned blade, flowed into the device. When she ended the call, she stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the dark window. I wondered if she saw what she had become, or only what she thought she deserved. Then she left, lights off, door closing behind her. I stepped down and placed the recorder back in its cradle. Not triumphantly, carefully. Evidence should never be handled with glee. Justice must be cold. The next step was an affidavit. Daniel could not hold a pen for long without trembling. He could not stay awake through lengthy explanations. He still clung to hope that Melissa would find her way back to the woman she once pretended to be. If I asked him to sign a statement against her, I would be asking him to witness the death of that hope. So I did what only a mother who had once been a lawyer would do. I signed my name on his behalf, not forging him, but invoking my right as caregiver, as guardian, as witness. I wrote, "I, Harriet Whitcombe, personally attest to the conduct of Melissa Whitcombe, herein documented with audio evidence and corroborated testimony. Not accusation, record." Once completed, I sealed it in an envelope and stored it in a metal cash box beneath the floorboard of my closet, along with Clara's statement, the audio recorder, the receipts from Melissa's designer purchases, while Daniel's medical bills went unpaid. I did not tell Daniel. Preparation is not betrayal. It is protection. In those days, we lived like actors in separate plays. Daniel focused on healing. Melissa focused on escape. Lily floated between them like a paper lantern, flickering but unextinguished. I focused on one thing only, the truth, secured. Some may ask why I did not confront Melissa directly, why I did not fling evidence at her feet and demand repentance. But confrontation demands an audience. I was not looking for spectacle. I was building a foundation. Besides, I knew Melissa. She would deny, cry, manipulate, accuse. She would say I misunderstood. She would twist my intention into hysteria. She would make Daniel choose. I would not give her that stage. So I let her believe I remained harmless. I still boiled tea and folded linen. I let her overlook the way I walked through the house, counting doors, noting times, marking shadows. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it nods and plans. It was during this time I began to visit the courthouse again, not to speak, to remember. I walked the marble halls, fingers brushing the walls. I read docket lists outside courtroom doors, studied faces, young attorneys rushing, clerks sighing, families waiting for verdicts. None knew me, but I recognized them all. One afternoon, Judge Elliot Granger passed me in the corridor. His hair is more silver now, his back more stooped. He paused, squinting, as if recalling a name he'd spoken long ago. "Do I know you?" he asked. I smiled. "You will." He nodded, unsettled. He walked on. When I returned home that evening, Melissa was in the living room, arranging papers, custody forms, financial declarations. She glanced at me, dismissive, assuming I saw nothing, but I had already seen everything. I went to my room, closed the door, and laid the recorder, the affidavit, and Clara's statement on the bed. 3 items, small, unassuming, a mother's arsenal. I pressed my palm atop them, not in rage, in oath. I will not let him be devoured. I will not let her weaponize his wounds. I will not let the truth go hungry. I turned off the light. That night the house slept, but justice, long dormant, had awakened. I did not shout. I prepared. And preparation, once complete, does not sleep again. The courthouse hallway felt colder than I remembered, not in temperature, but in manner, like walking into a memory that no longer recognized me. Daniel moved beside me, slow and unsteady on his crutches. Lily clung to his sleeve, uncertain, her eyes darting between us. Melissa walked ahead, shoulders squared, hair smoothed into perfection, her parents flanking her like a royal guard. She did not glance back. She did not need to. In her mind, the story had already been written. She was the aggrieved wife, Daniel, the ruined burden, and I, the silent aging ghost. When we entered Courtroom B, Melissa's attorney, Mr. Randall Pierce, was already standing by the defense table. Crisp suit, polished shoes, a smirk, the kind of attorney who decorates language with venom dressed as reason. Daniel eased himself into his seat, jaw clenched against pain. I remained standing behind him. The bailiff announced the judge. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Elliot Granger." Elliot Granger. Older now, but still bearing the same posture of restrained command. His gaze swept the room. He offered Melissa a courteous nod. Then he saw Daniel, and then behind him, me. His movement paused. Just a breath, barely discernible. But I saw it. The same pause from years ago when he watched me dismantle a perjured witness without raising my voice. He did not speak. Not yet. We were seated. Mr. Pierce rose first, voice ringing with polished concern. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Melissa Whitcombe, seeks dissolution of marriage on grounds of hardship. She has carried the full burden of care for her husband, who can no longer contribute physically, emotionally, or financially to the household. Furthermore, she has serious concerns regarding the safety and stability of their daughter under his supervision." Melissa dabbed her eyes with a tissue, dry, untouched. She had learned how to cry without tears. Judge Granger nodded for him to continue. Pierce went on smoothly. "In addition, there is an ongoing interference by a third party, Mrs. Harriet Whitcombe, the respondent's mother, whose presence has created psychological strain within the home. She is, in essence, a silent manipulator, fostering dependence rather than recovery." The words struck with clinical accuracy. Burden, instability, manipulator. Not once did Daniel raise his head. Pierce's final blow. This is not her fight. She holds no legal standing in this matter. Melissa sat taller. Her parents folded their arms. They believed the court belonged to them. And then, without a whisper or warning, I stood. The courtroom did not yet know my name. It would. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I let silence stretch its spine, taking its place among us. When I spoke, my words cut through the room like a gavel. "Your Honor, I am Harriet Whitcombe. I speak for my son." A murmur rippled. Melissa turned, disbelief curdling into something else. Judge Granger's chin lifted, his eyes narrowed, recognition dawning, memory flickering. Pierce scoffed. "Your Honor, she is not counsel of record. Her statements should be stricken." I faced him. Not directly, but slightly, the way one acknowledges a fly before closing a window. "I am not counsel," I said. "I am a witness and guardian, and the only person in this room who has cared for the man being spoken of as if he were already buried." Judge Granger leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitcombe," I met his gaze, "you may recall me under a different name." He hesitated. "I do." Pierce interjected, impatient. "Your Honor, with respect, this is highly irregular. This woman seeks to insert herself—" I turned to him. "Mr. Pierce, I have inserted myself nowhere. I have lived in the house your client wishes to seize. I have cooked the meals she will not serve. I have lifted the body she will not touch. I have cleaned the wounds she will not see." Silence clamped the room. Even Melissa faltered. "I will not argue the law," I continued. "Not yet. But if this court permits a mother to be labeled a disturbance after she has held up a home abandoned by its wife, then I am ready to argue far more than law. I am ready to argue my conscience." Judge Granger raised his gavel, not to silence, but to steady. "Mrs. Whitcombe," he said carefully, "you understand that your participation must be by procedural allowance. You are not here as an attorney." "I am here," I replied, "as truth." Pierce stiffened. "This is theatrics." "No," I said, "this is a record." Daniel's hand closed around his cane. He was still looking at the floor, but his shoulders had shifted. A breath re-entered his lungs. Melissa leaned forward, voice sharp with disbelief. "You think anyone cares who you used to be?" I looked at her fully, and for the first time I spoke her name not with anger, but with elegy. "Melissa, you once called me Mom. That is who I used to be." I did not look away. "But today I remember who I am." A hush followed, not reverent, but watchful, like wind before snowfall. Judge Granger exhaled slowly. "We will recess for 10 minutes." The gavel struck once. I placed my hand on Daniel's shoulder. He did not look at me, but he whispered, barely audible, "Mom, please don't." I bent close. "I will not fight her," I said gently. "I will reveal her." Power does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stands. And in that courtroom on that day, a shift occurred. Not loud, not seen, but felt, like a tide changing direction miles from shore. They had expected an old woman to sit and tremble. They had forgotten. I once stood in this arena, and I did not come to lose. Children should never have to walk into courtrooms. Their feet are meant for playgrounds, not marble floors. Yet that morning, Lily, my granddaughter, barely 9, stood at the threshold of Courtroom B, her small hands twisted in the hem of her dress, her eyes searching for a place to stand. She saw her mother first. Melissa lifted a hand, beckoning, composed, poised, as though this were any other performance. "Come here, sweetheart," she coaxed, smoothing the bench beside her. "Remember what we talked about?" Judge Granger nodded to the bailiff. "Bring the child forward." Daniel stirred beside me, his breath shallow. He whispered, "She shouldn't be here." I had no reply. Some battles require innocence to bear witness. Lily's steps were uneven, not clumsy, careful. She passed Melissa, but did not sit. Instead, she stood at the center of the aisle, between both tables. Melissa frowned. "Lily, sit down." The judge spoke gently. "Lily, do you know why you're here?" She nodded. "And do you understand you need to tell the truth today?" A tremor passed through her shoulders. "Yes, Your Honor." Melissa leaned forward, voice soft but edged. "Sweetheart, tell the court what you told me. Tell them you don't feel safe with your father. Say it." A hush fell. I felt Daniel go still. His fingers dug into the arm of his wheelchair. His eyes, red-rimmed, hollow, never left his daughter. Lily did not turn to her mother. She did not look at her father. Instead, she looked at me. Not for rescue, for permission. I did not nod. I did not smile. I simply held her gaze. You are not alone. She faced the judge. Her voice was barely audible. I want to stay. Melissa leaned in. Lily? Lily stepped back, out of reach. Her next words came clearer, steadier. Where love doesn't lie. Time stopped. The sentence hung, untouched, pristine in its quiet power. No one moved. The air itself seemed to listen. Melissa's composure cracked. What are you? Lily turned to her. You told me to say I was scared. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I'm not scared of Daddy. I'm scared of lying. The room shifted. Not loudly, deeply. Pierce rose, flustered. Your Honor, the child has clearly been influenced. Judge Granger raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Pierce. He faced Lily again. Why did you use those words, child? Lily swallowed. Because Daddy still says goodnight even when he's in pain. Because Grandma never lets the soup boil over even when she's crying. And because, her voice wavered, because love shouldn't ask me to say things that aren't true. A murmur rippled along the benches. Someone gasped. Daniel bowed his head into his hands. Melissa stood abruptly. She doesn't understand what's at stake. She's frightened and confused. No, Judge Granger interjected, stern. She's neither confused nor rehearsed. His voice softened. She's calling something by its proper name. Lily looked at him directly. Can I stay with Daddy? The judge hesitated. These moments, when a child speaks from the raw center of truth, are the gravity point of justice. Courts are built on statutes, but decisions, true decisions, are made on the pulse of humanity. You may sit with your grandmother, he said quietly. Lily walked to me. Without a word, she took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was fierce, like someone who had chosen a side. She did not bury her face in my arm. She did not cry. She simply stood. Melissa trembled. Real fear this time, not of loss, but of exposure. She turned to Pierce. Do something. He lowered his gaze. There are arguments even a hired tongue will not speak once truth has taken the stand. As court adjourned briefly, Daniel reached for Lily. Pumpkin, he whispered. I'm so... She shook her head. Don't say sorry, Daddy. He broke them, not into sobs, but into breathless release. A man long drowned, tasting air. I remained still, my hand wrapped around Lily's. I felt it then, the reversal, not of power, of balance. A woman may gather evidence, a mother may prepare testimony, but only truth, spoken without an agenda, can turn a courtroom. Lily had not defended us. She had defended love. And there, in the echo of her words, where love doesn't lie, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not victory, not relief, recognition. Once long ago, I had sworn an oath to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I had forgotten it. She reminded me. When court resumed, everything had changed. Not legally, not yet, but beneath the polished benches and oak columns, the ground had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. Melissa avoided our eyes. Pierce shuffled his papers without reading them. Judge Granger studied me, not as a relic, as a reckoning. And Lily, my Lily, sat between Daniel and me, her small hands. Finally still, no longer a child caught in the crossfire. A witness, the most powerful kind, the one who refuses to lie. Verdicts rarely arrive with trumpets. There is no thunderclap, no cinematic swell. Justice, when it comes, walks with quiet shoes. When Judge Granger returned to the bench, the room held a different kind of silence. Not anticipation, not dread, judgment. He spoke plainly. The court grants full residential custody of the minor child, Lily Whitcombe, to her father, Mr. Daniel Whitcombe, with guardian support from Mrs. Harriet Whitcombe. The marital home shall remain solely under Mr. Whitcomb's ownership, acquired prior to union. Mrs. Melissa Whitcombe is entitled to no assets or financial compensation and may petition only for supervised visitation. No flourish, no pause. The gavel fell once. It was done. Melissa didn't rise at first. She sat frozen, a portrait of disbelief. When she did stand, her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a metallic scream in a reverent room. She looked around, perhaps searching for a sympathetic eye, a witness to her outrage. No one met her gaze. She reached for Pierce. He did not stand. She turned toward Daniel. He looked away. At last, she looked at Lily, our Lily, sitting between us, hands folded in her lap. Lily did not flinch. She did not smile. She stared at her mother the way a door stares at someone who has already walked through it. Melissa's lips parted. Words gathered, then died. She walked out, her heels striking the floor like fading accusations. No one followed. No one watched. She was, at last, what she had feared most, alone. Daniel bowed his head, pressing his palms into his eyes. For a moment, I could not tell if he was breathing or breaking. Then he exhaled long and unguarded, and something escaped him. Not relief, not triumph. Grief. He was not grieving her. He was grieving the years he believed he was unworthy of love. Lily leaned toward him. "Daddy," she whispered, "can we go home?" Home. A word with walls. I placed my hand on Daniel's shoulder. He looked up at me with eyes I had not seen since he was a boy. Wet, unshielded. "I didn't win anything," he said, voice strained. I just wasn't taken." I nodded. Sometimes being allowed to stay is the greatest victory. He shook his head, wiping tears with clipped motions. "Mom, I didn't even fight." "You didn't have to," I said softly. "You lived. That was your defense." We did not leave through the main corridor. I led them through the east exit, where judges sometimes walk to chambers. I had walked that corridor before, decades earlier, wearing heels instead of flats, carrying files instead of family. At the end of the hall, there were 2 tall windows. I paused before them. Daniel stopped beside me. Lily, too, though she did not understand why. "Look," I told them. Outside, the sycamore trees along the courthouse lawn bent slightly with the wind, not breaking, bending. "Nothing that bends is weak," I said. "It's the rigid things that shatter." Daniel followed my gaze. Lily mimicked him. For the first time since his fall, since his injury, since his abandonment, my son stood, not tall, not proud, but upright, in his own quiet dignity. "I thought I was broken," he murmured. "You were bent," I answered, "and you straightened yourself." He leaned against the wall. His shoulders shuddered. Tears slipped again, silent. Not for Melissa, not for loss, for being believed, for being allowed to stand. When we reached the house, afternoon light slanted across the porch. Lily ran ahead, her backpack thumping against her back. She paused at the door and looked at me. "Grandma, she asked. "Yes, Lily?" "Can I open it?" It was such a simple question, but it felt like the final line of a long, unspoken testimony. "Yes," I said, "with your own hand." She lifted the key, Daniel's key, my key, and fitted it into the lock. It turned without resistance. The door opened. She stepped inside. Daniel remained on the porch. He turned to me. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I know you did something. I don't know what. But thank you." I met his eyes and laid my palm against his cheek. "I didn't fight her," I replied. "I remembered you." He blinked. "What if she comes back?" "She might," I said. "But now she knocks." He nodded. We entered. That night, Lily fell asleep in Daniel's lap while we sat in the living room. The lamp cast soft amber light. Daniel brushed her hair from her forehead, careful, reverent. "She chose me," he whispered. "No," I corrected. "She chose the truth, and truth chose you." He looked at me then, and I saw it. The quiet return of something I feared gone forever, his faith. Not faith in the world, faith in himself. I rose to leave the room. He called after me. "Mom?" "Yes?" He hesitated. "Were you scared?" I paused at the doorway. "Yes," I said. "Then how did you do it?" I turned off the lamp. "Not by shouting," I answered, "by refusing to disappear." Darkness fell softly. For the first time in a long time, it felt like rest. Verdicts fade from memory, courtrooms empty, but this remained, not the gavel, not the ruling, the simple, trembling truth. A broken man was believed, a silenced woman was heard, and a child refused to lie. Spring returned slowly that year, as if unsure it was welcome. The frost receded first, then the earth softened. One morning, I stepped onto the front porch and found Daniel already waiting there, a spade in his hand. He nodded toward the yard. "The old orange tree never bloomed again," he said. We both knew why. It had been planted in brighter days, watered with hope, neglected through sorrow. Last winter, its branches had dried to bone. "It's time," I replied. Together, we cleared the ground beneath the window where sun pooled in the afternoons. The air smelled faintly of soil and memory. Daniel dug carefully, though his strength was uneven. I knelt beside him, pressing the young orange sapling into place, my fingers settling the roots like tucking in a child. Lily joined us, her knees in the dirt, her hair wild in the breeze. She asked no questions. Children understand rebirth better than adults. She touched the tender leaves. "Will it grow?" "Yes," I said, "if we keep tending it." We watered it in silence. No ceremony, no speech, just care. Weeks passed. Lily resumed school. Daniel began physical therapy again, this time with purpose, not only endurance. Life held shape. Fragile, yes, but shape nonetheless. One afternoon, as I was shelling peas by the window, Lily burst through the door, breathless. "Grandma, the tree, look!" I followed her outside. There it was, a single orange, small, green, defiant, clinging to a branch that had once been barren. Lily reached for it instinctively, then paused. She looked at me. I nodded. "This one is yours," I said. She cupped it gently, as if it might bruise. "Does this mean it's better now?" I smiled. "It means it's coming." That evening, we sat on the porch, Daniel in his wooden chair, I in mine, Lily cross-legged on the steps with her prized fruit in her lap. The sun dipped behind the sycamores. The house, our house, glowed amber in the fading light. For the first time since the trial, Lily spoke of her mother. "Do you think she'll ever plant something again?" I kept my eyes on the tree. "Maybe, when she remembers how." "And if she doesn't?" I exhaled. "Then someone else will." We didn't say more. Some questions are answered in waiting, not words. Later, when the moon rose, I returned alone to the porch. The night was gentle. The air is still. I could almost hear the sap moving through the orange tree, patient as breath. I sat and folded my hands. I did not speak to the darkness. I spoke to memory. I did not stay silent because I was afraid. I murmured. I stayed silent because I was holding something, waiting to place it carefully. My voice did not tremble. Silence is not surrender. It is preparation. I did not turn to any camera. I did not offer a sermon. I spoke as one woman to those who have endured invisibility. If they tell you you're too quiet, I continued, ask them, too quiet for what? The wind stirred the leaves. Some of us speak not with noise, I said, but with what we cannot be made to deny. The porch light flickered softly. I rose and turned toward the door. Before stepping inside, I said the only benediction I had left in me. To those who have been accused of disappearing, tell me, were you gone? Or were you gathering strength? I paused. And if you've been silent, tell me, what have you been holding? The house stood behind me, the orange tree before me, the world somewhere beyond both, waiting. My story is finished. But another was already beginning. Not of courtrooms, not of verdicts, of seasons, of what grows again. After winter, after rupture, after silence. If you, listening to this, have ever been called too silent, Not angry enough, not loud enough, not present enough. Tell me, not your name, not your pain. Tell me what your silence has carried, because some of us are not gone. We are simply preparing to stand, to plant, to begin again. The night held me gently as I went inside. There would be other storms, but I had roots now, and an orange season has already begun.